Hi, and today what I'd like to talk about are the fate of the Tier 19 raids as soon as the Tier 20 raid starts to come out, and of course the Tier 21 raid later on. Now, what prompted this was something I was watching Asmongold's 7.2 review thing, and he sort of mentioned something, a bit of a throwaway comment, that I thought, actually, no, this is not inevitable. And what he was talking about was the fact that when the Tomb of Sargeras raid comes out, not the Tomb of Sargeras patch, that's out now, then it's going to sort of invalidate the earlier raids because just the gear level of the next stuff. And this is a gear-based game. You go for wherever's going to get the best gear. That's how it all works. And this has been true, of course, in past expansions. Or not all of the expansions. You go right back, it was a different thing, but it was a different thing now. So more recent expansions. You know, it's been the case, like, say, in WoD, for example, which is the most recent one. A lot of people would have experienced that. You weren't really, as soon as Blackrock Foundry came out, you might have done Highmore for a little bit, but you weren't doing it towards the end of Blackrock Foundry. When Hellfire Citadel came out, you certainly weren't going to be doing Highmore. You wouldn't have been doing Blackrock Foundry very much, if at all. Maybe you'd have been jumping straight to the last boss and all the rest of it, because it was invalidated by the fact that the gear was so far behind in item level. And I thought, well, the same thing, in theory, could happen here. If we just carry on as we are, this would happen here. But there is actually a solution to it. Now, there's a couple of things I want to talk about with raids, that what Blizzard could do with the Tier 19 raids when the Tier 20 raid comes out, and indeed the Tier 21. And what I've identified is two problems with the solution to each one. Now, of course, this is purely opinion. You might not actually agree that either of these problems are problems at all, in which case, obviously, you're not going to agree with the solutions. You might agree with the problems, and you might not agree with the solutions. That's fine. Don't sweat it. I'm not from Blizzard. Blizzard don't even watch this. There is no chance of any of this becoming reality unless they independently came up with the same thing themselves. But it is potentially possible, because what I am suggesting is something that actually already exists. I'm not suggesting that anything that would require a lot of development time to come up with something new, because they already have the same thing in game but for other content. So I'm just suggesting it's done for raids. So if you think about it, when Tomb of Sargeras comes out, what is there going to be to stop people doing Emerald Nightmare? Why don't a lot of raiders do Emerald Nightmare now? The reason is because the rewards are not good enough. They're too low item level. The trinkets were just tosh anyway, so even if you don't even hope that they get Titan Forge because they were just bad. That's why we're running around in dungeon trinkets for so long. But, you know, ultimately it's gear. There is other good gear as well that people might, in theory, run it for, but it's just going to fall way behind. So what if you scaled it up? Now, there's a few ways you could do this. One of which you could just have it dynamically scale with the average item level of the group. That doesn't sound very clever to me, because, you know, that there would be a way to game that, surely. The second way is that you just do what they've done with the dungeons in Legion, which is just that the gear they just increase the item level of the gear that drops off it. Again, not necessarily great idea. But then what I thought is, what if they did the opposite of what they've done in past expansions, like say Wrath and things like that? Sometimes what they did with a particular raid tier is, as a way of sort of helping people push through the harder bosses, after a while they would have a stacking buff each week, which basically made you more powerful or the encounter easier, however you want to look at it. But you could choose to talk to an NPC and have that removed. I'm trying to think what that was from. I'm pretty sure that was the case in Dragon Soul, at least. And that was, of course, Cataclysm, not Wrath. But my memory is a little bit hazy about exactly how it works. But what I was thinking is, let's say when Tomb of Sargeras comes out, you've got Emerald Nightmare as it is now, on all the different difficulties. But let's say on normal, heroic, or mythic difficulty, the ones for which you need an organised group, you go into the instance and there's an NPC there, and you can ask the NPC to turn it to the higher level. This is a bit like, in fact, no, it's not a bit like, it's exactly like what Blizzard did in Warlords of Draenor with dungeons and mythic dungeons. So what they did is, partway through the expansion, they came up with mythic dungeons. And these were just the same as the normal dungeon, or the heroic dungeon, whatever you want to call them, but harder. They were just tuned harder. There were no extra abilities. Nothing different about the fight at all. It was just tuned harder, and you got better item level gear. Now, people were upset about this when it came in, but it wasn't because of the idea. It was because it was seen as a substitute for content. We didn't get any other content. what I'm suggesting is that they do this with the tier 19 raids, and it wouldn't be seen as a substitute for content because we would be getting content. That's not been a problem in Legion. It's a way of keeping content relevant, and Blizzard have been very big about that. They said one of their big things about Legion, they wanted to make dungeons relevant all the way through. They've sort of done that. They've done really well on that. Now what I would suggest is maybe they should say, let's keep the raids relevant through the expansion. So you could have, I mean, you don't call it Mythic Emerald Nightmare because we've already got that. But, you know, you talk to an NPC in there and they just raise up the difficulty and the item level scales up. And what I thought, now, so then you think, so where do you set the bar? I would say, as soon as Tomb of Sargeras Raid comes out, that's not going to completely invalidate Nighthold. So maybe what you do is you just, in the first instance, raise it up like Emerald Nightmare and Trial of Valor up to the point of Nighthold. So all the tier 19 raids are set at the same level. Because the progression doesn't necessarily make sense anymore. Maybe from a storyline point of view it does, but from, you know, what people really want raids for, which is go in and get gear and do the encounters, it doesn't matter from that point of view. So make them all the same. So put normal, Trial of Valor and Emerald Nightmare up to the same level as normal Nighthold. Same with the heroics, same with the mythics. Just tune it up to that point. Get the gear to give the same item level at that point. There's no even, they don't even need to sort of stagger the item level across the bosses as they do now, because, you know, like the item level of Scorpion is lower than the item level, the base item level, that is, of stuff that drops off Gul'dan, for example. There's no need. You could just readjust all that, put it all on the same level, so that all the bosses are of equal worth. Tune them up. You know, leave Nighthold as it is, but tune the other two raids up to the same point, and that potentially then gives people a reason to run those raids, even when Tomb of Sargeras comes out. They could potentially do that. There'll still be a little bit easier. Tomb of Sargeras is still the premier content. There's no getting away from that. That is still going to be harder and give the higher item level. But the others are just a little level below it, not way below it, and making it completely useless. So then there would potentially be another problem, a second problem, which sort of already exists, and that is to do with artifact power, in my view. So doing raids is a really good way of getting artifact power. So at the moment, what you're really encouraged to do, if you're a Mythic Raider, you'll do the Mythic bosses and farm what you can on those. Then you'll also want to do a Heroic run and a normal run and an LFR run of Nighthold. So you want to do Nighthold 4 times, ideally, to get the maximum artifact power from it. Because even LFR Nighthold gives decent artifact power. You sort of wait for the LFR, if you've got the time to do it, until after you've got your artifact knowledge that week. But, you know, really good. Then, if you did this with Emerald Nightmare and Trial of Valor as well, there's a fear, certainly in my mind, there's a fear that you'd be encouraged to do all these raids, and it's, again, too much. It's a bit like having to spam the Mythic Plus dungeons. It's the same thing, and it almost becomes too much, and you think, well, why would we do that? So then I was thinking, maybe they could change the way artifact power is given in raids. And again, in line with something they've already done. So, at the moment, they've already made a change to this, because, like, when Legion first came out, you could get artifact power off doing raid bosses, but it was random. You occasionally got it and you occasionally didn't, and a lot of times you didn't. And I don't know whether it seemed to be a 50-50 thing, but invariably I ended up with slightly less than that. Maybe it was slightly less than that, I don't know. But it wasn't very satisfactory. Now, and then they changed it so at Nighthold, every boss in Nighthold would give you an artifact power token guaranteed. And the same level. No RNG about that at all. Then I'm thinking, well, then it's sort of too much. You've been asked to do too much. What if instead of getting artifact power from the bosses, that just like with the weekly cache, now we get artifact power based on the highest level Mythic Plus dungeon we've done. What if they did the same thing for raids? So, except, I mean, I know in the Mythic Plus dungeon, you still get artifact power in the dungeons themselves. But I'm thinking, maybe you don't get artifact power from the raid bosses. Now, this is the most controversial talk. There'll be some people saying, no, that'd be really bad. And I can see how it potentially could. I'm not saying this is definitely a good idea. It's just potentially a thought that you don't get artifact power from the raid bosses. But what happens is, it sees the most difficult raid content that you've done that week, and then in the next weekly cache you get artifact power in line with that content to reward you for doing the hardest possible raid content that you could have done. So doing the raids would be purely about, can I get gear in here? Because remember what Blizzard said, the whole idea of Titan Forging was to encourage you to do raids where maybe the baseline stuff wasn't upgraded for you, but maybe it could Titan Forge. So just have that, and test that idea out, not the artifact power, and get the artifact power from the weekly cache based on the most difficult raid stuff, encounters that you had done. But anyway, those are sort of my ideas for some of the things that Blizzard could do to keep raids relevant without making them sort of seem compulsory, having to do loads and loads of raids, especially the older raids that people might not all that be bothered about, making them sort of compulsory. To my mind, it might, I'm not saying it definitely would, but it might solve those particular issues. What do you think? Comments below, as usual. And I hope you found it interesting. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and share for further content. And until next time, I'll see you later.